Good evening, and welcome to tonight's edition of Media Reporter. My name is April Myers, and I'm a student here at New York Law School. Tonight's program will present highlights from a distinguished panel that met here at New York Law School to discuss a New York Times bestseller, Protect and Defend by Richard North Patterson. This legal thriller addresses the very controversial subjects of late-term abortion, minors' abortion rights, parental consent, and a nomination of a Supreme Court Chief Justice. I myself had a hard time putting this book down. I found it both educational and enjoyable. The book is about a 15-year-old girl who is pregnant. She seeks an abortion due to the severe complications in her pregnancy. Her parents oppose this abortion. A recent enacted federal law requires that she have her parents' consent. This 15-year-old girl challenges this law all the way to the United States Supreme Court. This book is also about a newly elected Democratic president who is about to appoint the first ever woman to the position of Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. The politics surrounding the nomination process portrayed in this book is so realistic that it's hard to believe that it's fiction. Let's hear how Professor Nadine Strossen, president of the American Civil Liberties Union, tell us about what she thinks about the book.
This book is not only an enthralling,
exciting, entertaining read, it's also extremely educational about a whole range of legal, political, and ethical issues. Moreover, it's inspirational. It should galvanize all of us, from lawyers to law students to high school students and anyone else, to recognize what a difference we can each make by standing up for our rights and standing up for what is right. Many young people have told me that they weren't especially interested in or informed about the issues that the book addresses, from minors' abortion rights to Supreme Court appointments, but that the book raised their awareness and their concern. And it does so in a way that is thorough and balanced. One of the handouts we've given you is the novel's list of acknowledgments, which reads like a who's who of leaders and experts in all of the areas on which the book touches. Most notably, the author, Rick Patterson, consulted with and studied the writings of top experts with very different views. Not only a Republican former president, but also a Democrat, not only pro-choice advocates, but also pro-life, to cite just a couple examples. As someone who's written about some of the constitutional issues the book addresses, and I'm so proud to have earned an acknowledgement, thank you, Rick, I would gladly assign the book to constitutional law students. In fact, I think it should be used for studying everything from trial tactics to political strategy to journalistic ethics. And the issues it explores, as Rick Madisar indicated, are incredibly relevant to today's political scene, indeed uncannily so.
Here's Richard North Patterson, the author of Protect and Defend, describing the book and telling us why he undertook the task of writing on such unpopular subjects.
Well, yeah, that was so wonderful. I feel kind of like I'm at my memorial service. Thank you, Nadine, very much. I'm honored to be here at New York Law School, both with the teens counselors and especially in the company of some of the most distinguished legal and moral thinkers we have, Alan Dershowitz, Jay Sekulow, Nadine Strossen, and Sol Wachtler. I'm just glad I didn't have to submit my law school transcript to Rick Madisar in order to get here. But even in this company, I can claim at least one unique distinction. As far as I know, I'm now the author of the only New York Times bestselling novel ever written on that foolproof commercial subject, partial birth abortion. I want to talk about why I undertook this somewhat daunting task and what that experience taught me. It's not an easy subject. It's uncomfortable, it's controversial, and certainly, as my publisher pointed out to me, it is not a movie of the week. And you won't be seeing this one on the Fox channel, and I understood my publisher's reservations. It is a subject which is perhaps the most divisive that we have in American politics today. But this is the book I'm proudest of, because I believe that popular fiction can and sometimes should address difficult moral questions, including the bitter and divisive political environment which degrades our public life, in which the war over abortion rights plays such a defining role. Now, I should stop and explain the plot for the 2 or 3 of those who Nadine has not yet persuaded to read the book. The first strand concerns a narrowly elected young president, Kerry Kilcannon, who nominates Carolyn Masters, an appellate judge, to be the first woman Chief Justice. She's brilliant, she's polished, and best of all, from his political perspective, she has no record at all on abortion. Never talked about it, never wrote about it, never had an abortion rights case. But she also harbors a personal secret which could doom her in the Senate if found out, that at 22, she gave birth to a child who instead believes that she's Carolyn's niece. The second strand involves another girl at 15, Mary Ann Tierney, who faces another difficult choice. She discovers in the 6 months of her pregnancy that her baby is hydrocephalic, likely but not certain to have no meaningful cerebral development. Her only way of finding out for sure is to deliver the child by means of a cesarean section, which in turn will create a small but measurable risk of infertility. The only way to prevent that risk is through a late-term abortion. And Mary Ann's mother and father, a Catholic law professor and principal pro-life activist, oppose all abortion as a matter of conscience. Now, the legal and medical context for this case, as Nadine has indicated, is quite real. Under Roe versus Wade and its progeny, all late-term abortion, that is, post-viability, can be banned except if there is a threat to the mother's life or health. But important standards are left unresolved. By what standard do we measure a threat to health? Does it include mental health, or is that the slippery slope to abortion on demand of late-term fetuses because it has no discernible standards? Does physical health include reproductive health? How severe must the threat to health be? And how does it weigh against a fetus whose prospects for life and health seem blighted, but has some chance of being normal? These are among the issues raised by my fictional tyranny case. And to frame them legally, I imagine a fictional but realistic new federal law, the Protection of Life Act. It provides that the only acceptable threat to health is a narrowly defined physical threat. It also provides that no minor can have a late-term abortion unless the standard of physical health, of threat to physical health is met, and she either has the consent of her parents or a court otherwise finds that the threat to physical health exists. Now, in my case, Mary Ann Tierney's parents won't consent, and under this statute, a small chance of infertility does not qualify her to get an abortion. So her only hope is to go to court, have the statute declared unconstitutional under Roe versus Wade, over the objection of her pro-life parents, and in time to have an abortion. As my story would have it, the case rockets toward the court where our nominee, Carolyn Masters, still sits awaiting confirmation, presenting her with all the legal dilemmas I've already mentioned, the moral dilemma of whether to decide the case or to try to duck deciding it, and when, whether, and how she decides it may precipitate a pitched battle in Congress which will doom her chances of being Chief Justice. Now, why did I invent this unmessy and pleasant dilemma other than it's sort of fun to make these things up? First, to explore the two hardest issues in the painful debate over abortion, so-called partial birth abortion and parental consent. And second, to open a window on how we view abortion generally, including the differences between debating abortion as a moral issue and what happens to balanced moral argument when an aspect of abortion, such as, quote, partial birth, unquote, becomes embroiled in politics.
The panel all agreed that the book is a must-read for advocates on both sides of the abortion issue. Let's hear from Jay Sekulow, pro-life attorney and counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice. Tell us what he thinks about the book.
Let me close by this, saying just a couple of very quick points. This is a hugely divisive issue in this country. I mean, sincere people disagree on this. President Bush made the statement that good people can disagree on this, and I think that that reflects the nature of this debate. But the procedure of partial birth abortion, even as described in the book, and I think accurately described, is a gruesome, gruesome process. It is, and the book does an excellent job of describing it, the 7th month of pregnancy, this defective fetus, as Rick calls it, his life is taken. Whether that life had real merit outside as far as how much life would be there, whether it would be a situation where the child would be so deformed to have no quality of life whatsoever. I think what Rick said, which is telling, which is another reason to read the book, is that the women that are involved in this process never forget that they were involved in the process, and it has nothing to do with the pro-life movement. This is a profound national debate, and where the book, I think, adds to the debate is an understanding of the complexity. I think the lawyers were treated, I don't like the balance of the lawyers in the book, and I think that wasn't correct, but overall, it adds a lot to the debate. One last point, then I'll sit down. The whole issue of the politics of this, I think where we all agree, or at least Rick and I agree, is the politics of personal destruction that we have seen since the Bork process, I think is a blight on the country. I think we're losing good people on both sides of the aisle on this issue, and on other issues as well. I think it's unfortunate that we're holding out individuals' personal lives as if they should be sinless. And Jesus said, don't cast the first stone if you're without sin, and when the Pharisees left, they couldn't do it, and neither can we. And the idea that we're now putting up this stature of a person that has to be without blemish to be confirmed, I think is an unfortunate aspect of public life today. And we also, I don't think, leave enough for people's ability to be rehabilitated. People make mistakes. All of us have made mistakes. And we believe as a country, I hope, that people can be rehabilitated from those mistakes and given a second chance. And in some sense, the way the book ends, I think, gives you that hope. At the end, the girl does go back to her parents. There's fear and trepidation, but I think if there was another chapter written, if these parents were as true to their convictions as they are, as they appear to be, I think that the young girl would have been welcomed back in that home and is welcomed back in the home. But that will be for maybe part 2 of this great book. And again, I want to encourage people, on my side of the issue, many of you that are watching this perhaps by TV or even in the audience are always concerned when you've gotten a book about partial birth abortion that at the end goes in favor of the partial birth abortion. That is not a basis upon which to not read this book. That would be a tremendous mistake. I've talked to theologians that have read this book from conservative Christian seminaries. I've talked to others that are more liberal in their theological views. The uniform approach from everyone I've talked to has been, this is a must-read book on this issue, and I think it is. And Rick, I think you did a great job, very good job.
Famed criminal defense attorney and Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz also gives Protect and Defend his kudos.
Sometimes the truth is better discerned through fiction than through fact, and Richard North Patterson has contributed enormously to our understanding of the complexities and difficulties of these issues. I think that if we were here 100 years from now, in this wonderful law school, in this wonderful setting, I do honestly believe that we would not be closer to resolving the core issue of late-term abortion. I think science will move us into a narrower area of controversy, which is part of the brilliance of this book.
While the panel tried to keep to a discussion on the book, it was a difficult task with the recent election and the many other controversial issues the book raised. To add a twist to the night, Professor Dershowitz tells us his views on abortion, as well what he thinks about the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Roe v. Wade.
And now we're going to hear from a very strong pro-choice activist who, however, is doubtful about the wisdom and constitutional basis of Roe v. Wade. I think Roe versus Wade is very different from other Supreme Court decisions, which I think today everybody agrees with. For example, the desegregation decisions. In the desegregation decisions, there was a point of unquestioned principle. Segregation was just wrong. And it took time, it may have taken a Supreme Court decision to persuade virtually everybody that that is the truth. That hasn't happened, and it will never happen in the abortion controversy. I think abortion is right. I think choice is the better way. But I could never persuade somebody who honestly believed that the fetus was human life, that it's proper to take that human life. I understand the argument on the other side. It is a compelling argument. I could never understand, nor could any reasonable person, the argument in favor of segregation. And I think when you have a moral conflict of this kind, a moral conflict which is subject to being resolved, maybe not to our satisfaction, but being resolved by the political process, that it's dangerous and unwise for the courts to step in. Segregation could never have been solved by the political process because of malapportionment. You needed to clear the channels of democracy. You needed to enfranchise African American voters just as we had to enfranchise women voters and others. But the abortion controversy was different. A majority of Americans are women, and many, many men and most women favor women's right to choose abortion. In fact, I want to read you from the ACLU's own position paper, and as you all know, I'm a longtime member of the ACLU, a former national board member of the ACLU. Between 1967 and 1971, says the ACLU position paper, which you all have, under mounting pressure from the women's rights movement, 17 states decriminalized abortion. Public opinion also shifted during this period. In 1968, only 15% of Americans favored legal abortions. By 1972, 64% did. When the court announced its landmark 1973 ruling legalizing abortion in Roe versus Wade, it was marching in step with public opinion. That is not the job of the United States Supreme Court, to march in step with public opinion. That's the job of the legislature. That's the job of the executive. What I worry so much about is that Roe versus Wade did harm to the movement in favor of a woman's right to choose abortion in the end. What it did is it energized the right to life movement. It energized the religious right. And I think it made those of us who strongly support a woman's right to choose somewhat lazy and busy celebrating our great judicial victory and neglecting the hard work of organizing and fundraising, at least in the beginning.
Professor Dershowitz, clearly upset with the Supreme Court's interference in the abortion issue, gives us his insight on the effects of Roe versus Wade on the current Supreme Court.
I think it also helped to pressure Republican presidents to nominate activist right-wing justices, such as Antonin Scalia and Clarence Thomas. That was their debt to be paid, and I think also the nomination most recently of an extremely right-wing and dangerous Attorney General of the United States, who was nominated because of his support for the right to life and his opposition to Roe versus Wade. I also think that Roe versus Wade was the genesis of the most recent Supreme Court decision on the election. It's not easy to simply make a one-to-one association between those two decisions, but they, in my view, represent opposite sides of the same currency of judicial activism and areas more appropriately left to the political processes. Courts ought not to jump into controversies that are political in nature and capable of being resolved, even if not smoothly, expeditiously, or correctly, by the popular branches of government. Judges have no special competence, qualifications, or mandate to decide between equally compelling moral claims, as in the abortion controversy, or equally compelling political claims, counting ballots by hand or stopping the recount because the standard is imperfect. Absent clear governing constitutional principles, which I think are not present in either case, These are precisely the sorts of issues that should be left to the rough and tumble of politics rather than the ipsy-dixit of 5 judges. Now, there are major differences, of course, between Roe versus Wade and Bush versus Gore. No matter how critical one might be of Roe, no one can accuse the justices who voted for it of being politically partisan. The author was a Republican appointed by President Nixon. The issue was not a Republican-Democrat one at the time. It was decided, certainly less than it is today. The division over the constitutionality of abortion laws was much more doctrinal, ideological, and religious than, I think, politically partisan. But if I'm right that it ultimately helped elect conservative Republicans, then there's certainly a big difference between that and Bush versus Gore. Moreover, no one can reasonably accuse the justices who voted for Roe of cheating. Roe was entirely the predictable culmination of a long process of articulating and expanding the right of privacy and reproductive freedom. Reasonable people could argue that the majority in Roe went too far, too fast, and in too sweeping a manner, but if you presented 1,000 of the leading constitutional scholars with the case of Roe versus Wade, a year before Roe versus Wade was decided, 995 of them probably would have predicted Roe versus Wade. If you presented the same 1,000 scholars with the Bush-Gore controversy, 995 of them would have predicted that without knowing the names of the litigants in the case, would have predicted that the court would not have stopped the hand recount in that election. The justices of the Supreme Court in this most recent case cheated.
Judge Sol Wachtler, former Chief Justice of the New York State Court of Appeals, gives us his impression of protect and defend, as well as the power and role of the judiciary.
You know, one of the lines used by Rick in the book, and Kerry Kilcannon says it, I think, with a bit of sarcasm, and a line which our president has used very frequently. In fact, his first interview, when they asked him what kind of a judges would he appoint, he said, "We are a nation of laws, not of men." Now that simply is not true. It is the men and women who have interpreted the laws, the judges, who really have created this great matrix that we call our American society. Our founding fathers said, all men are created equal. And they spoke those words with a heart full of love and compassion for their fellow man, but they never once meant to include women or members of the black race. It was each generation, from Dred Scott, where a black person couldn't be a citizen, to the separate but equal doctrine, to Brown Board of Education, where equality and together, to the Santa Clara Highway case, where we said that women have a right of equality in the workplace. All these cases, same Constitution, same court, but those courts, as they progressed, reflecting the morality and the conscience of their time. So we are a nation, really, of the men and women who are the judges who interpret the law. I can remember in our courthouse, and Jay and Alan were remarking about our courtroom as having, I think it is the most beautiful courtroom in the world, the New York State Court of Appeals. And it's all hand-carved out of this beautiful oak. And there's a story told that the prisoners from our state penitentiaries did a lot of that work. And one of those prisoners had his appeal coming up to the court. And it was an easy reversal. The man should have been let free. But one of the judges said, "Who will finish the rotunda?" And that's how the entry "affirm no opinion" came about. But although the story is apocryphal, the fact is that judges have an awful lot to say, and they should not, as Alan said, they should not bow to public opinion or whims or editorial boards. They must interpret the law as they see the law properly, and they must follow precedents. But make no mistake about it, the people who control the political machinery will control who the judges are, and those judges will reflect that political machinery.
Professor Dershowitz replies to Judge Wachtler's position of the constitutional basis for the decision in Roe versus Wade.
Now,
My own view is that also the court may very well have been wrong. It is not, with due respect, Judge Wachtler, an easy leap from privacy to abortion rights. I am a fervent believer in the right of privacy. I believe that people have the right to be homosexuals in the privacy of their home or anywhere else, as long as it's consensual, the right to masturbate, the right to computer-generated child pornography, the right to drug use in the home, the right to assisted suicide. But your right to swing your fist ends at the tip of my nose, and your right to inhale ends when you exhale on me. And what separates abortion from other issues, for example, the issue of birth control, is that there is a claim that there is another right involved, another person involved, the fetus, and there's simply no good answer.
Abortion, parental consent, and judicial nominations are complicated subjects, and where the law fits into this is not easy to understand. The facts of Protect and Defend address these subjects in such a way that we can all get a good grasp on them. I highly recommend you read this book. Whether or not you care about the abortion issue, which side you're on it is a gratifying experience. I'm April Myers. Thank you for watching tonight's edition of Media Reporter.